Welcome, my friends, to Old Stonewell Farm, where the season of Advent has already begun. As I embrace the ancient celebration of Advent, which is a full 40 days leading up to the birth of Christ, rather than the 4-week modern celebration. And along the way, I bring to you a Swiss tradition of carving out turnips and making them into little lanterns. It is said that the children used to sing, "Turnip lantern, little turnip lantern, where are you going? In the dark night without stars, there must be my little light." In our world today, there must be my little light burning brightly, and your little light burning brightly. What would it take to get that light ignited? That is the question that I keep asking myself this Advent season, this time of year in which I light up this old house with candles burning as a reminder that the light of Christ is always shining in the nooks and crannies of my dark world, of your dark world. And there's just something so simple and joyous about carving turnips and turning them into vehicles of light. Light that needs to shine always. Yes, it is a time of year in which the world starts to ramp up the holiday chaos. But my friends, we have a choice. We don't have to be part of that chaos. We can turn our back on the way the world celebrates the holidays, and we can embrace simple joys. For in the simple things, we find the true meaning of what a blessing is. It's in the simple things in which we are reminded of God's great love for us. And there's nothing more simple than an old recipe I found in a German cookbook dated 1581, in which you take turnips, beef broth, and a lot of butter, and you simmer. Delicious, simple, and filling. And so the season of Advent is here, the calm before Christmas, a time to embrace the simple joys all around us, a time in which my little light is shining brightly for you, my friends. Well, welcome, my friends, to Old Stonewell Farm. For those of you who are watching in the United States, I'm sure that right now you are in the middle of planning your Thanksgiving feasts. So let me be the first to wish you a very blessed Thanksgiving to you, your family, and your friends. Here at Old Stonewell Farm, it's just going to be my husband and myself. A very simple, quiet day. In fact, my husband doesn't really like Thanksgiving food. Anything that is filled with cranberries, pumpkin, molasses, corn, whatever it might be, I call that my pilgrim food, and I adore it. So what I might do, the weather has been pretty good here, no significant snow right now, and it hasn't been very cold. So I'm going to fire up my outdoor bake oven, and I'm going to try to cook a pilgrim meal for myself. I have a small chicken, not a turkey, but a very small chicken that I want to try to roast on my roasting rack that I have over the fire. And I'm going to make Indian pudding, which is cornmeal and molasses. And I might even make an original pumpkin pie, just a pumpkin that's hollowed out and filled with molasses and spices, and then cooked in the ashes of the fire until it's nice and soft, and then you just kind of mix it around. I did that a few years back, and it was absolutely delicious. So we are heading into the holidays very rapidly. And for some of you, perhaps The Christmas season has already begun right after Halloween. I almost put my tree up, an artificial tree I have, in addition to a real tree that I get. But I do now like to have a tree up earlier in the season to enjoy. And I almost put it up the earliest ever, but I held back. I'm going to try to do it after Thanksgiving. I just felt like I needed a little Christmas right this very moment, to quote Mame from that show. I also wanted more light in the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. The days are getting shorter and darkness descends upon us. And I think that's why we all adore the holidays, because of the lights that are shining and they just brighten up our day. So for this time right before Thanksgiving, right before we get into Advent, right before we get into Christmas, here at Old Stonewall Farm, I like to celebrate the ancient Advent, also known as Celtic Advent. It was traditional many, many years ago for Advent to be a full 40 days to mimic the 40 days of Lent. So you have 40 days to prepare for Easter, for Lent, but then you also had 40 days to prepare in Advent for the coming of Christ. This year, I shared with you the tradition, a Swiss-German tradition, of carving out turnips and then making little lanterns out of them. Now, usually it was done early in November. Many times it was done to coincide with St. Martin's Day, which is November 11th. And it is to remember the light and the warmth of compassion that St. Martin had for the cold beggar, in which St. Martin then took his cloak and he shared it. And it turns out that that beggar was, in fact, Jesus. Early on in the Swiss German cantons, it was a tradition for children to make lanterns out of turnips. Now, turnips were abundant. They were the popular crop. And so they would carve them out and put a candle in them and use it to light the way for November celebrations, and particularly St. Martin's Day. Well, over the years, the turnip was replaced with just paper lanterns that the children make. I could see the sense in the paper lanterns because these things are hard to carve. Oh my goodness. If you ever tried to carve a turnip, and you can see I didn't do very well with the decorations because I just was having a hard time. So I just kind of put little slits in them and triangles. My turnips are a little bit on the small side. I think that the turnips that other people had to carve were bigger. I went to the grocery store to get turnips and hoping I could find like a bigger turnip than this. This was all that was left, so I got it. But as I was checking out, the guy in the grocery store was like, "Oh, wow, that's a really tiny turnip. We have really big ones at our farm." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's the turnip I wanted." But I decided this year to embrace the tradition for the start of the ancient Advent to have a lantern to remember that there is the warmth of God's love still shining in the world, and to remember the warmth of compassion, the light of love that we are to have for others, like St. Martin had for the cold, naked beggar that indeed turned out to be Jesus himself, in which the saint was tending to. I just think it's really lovely too that the children used turnips, what was around, what was abundant, and they took what was there to turn it into something special. They took whatever was available to use it as a way to illustrate the light in the world. A reminder, especially as we head into the holiday season with all the commercialized buy, 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 it's a reminder that the best gifts are the ones that God has already provided. A simple turnip that is carved out and a candle placed in it to make a makeshift lantern. You don't need to run out and buy fancy lanterns to have a little parade to usher in an early Advent, to usher in the season of light, but a turnip. It reminds me of the Little House on the Prairie books that Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote. And in her book, The Long Winter, they were running out of everything. The snow was so high that the trains couldn't get out to the west where they lived with all the supplies that they needed. So not only were they running out of food to eat, but they were also running out of kerosene and any kind of candles to light their room. And that is when Laura recalls how Ma said, "That's okay, fear not." And so she had Pa get some of the grease that was used for the farm equipment. He got some of that grease, and then Ma went into her little container with buttons, and then she took scraps of material and she folded the scraps and she pulled it through the buttons, and then she soaked it in the oil. And so she lit it, and that was a makeshift light for them. And she made do with what they had, and I'm in awe of that. So carving a turnip into a lantern, finding buttons and pieces of scrap material and whatever grease you might have and turning it into light. I don't think I ever would have thought of that because we don't think that way. We take light for granted. We just switch on a switch and the electric lights come on, and we just light up the darkness with this artificial light, and we don't even think twice about what would happen if that light wasn't there, or we don't realize how precious light is. And that is why here at Stonewall Farm, I like to delve into a different time period because it reminds me how they valued what they had more. We take light for granted, but back then, light wasn't a guarantee. When you read up on the history of candles, especially in early colonial America, candles were a commodity. If you were a hired hand for a household, there are records in which they were paid with candles. It was precious. And how many candles you got and how to make sure you didn't just burn the candle out. You had to be very careful with how you want to use that candle. You just couldn't say, okay, well, I just want to stay up all night reading, so I'm going to light the candle. No, you tried to do as much as you can when there was natural light around. And then when you needed a candle, well, you made sure you didn't waste that light. And the richer households had better candles. They had candles that were made out of beeswax, not animal fat, which the poorer households would use. Animal fat would burn very smoky and it would smell. So even the type of candles, even the type of light that you had would signify where you stood in society. Of course, at Christmas time, I do make my bayberry candles. Those candles were only used in the church for special occasions because they were so precious and so expensive to make that those candles were relegated to the house of God. Now, the turnip lantern isn't just a Swiss-German tradition that started sometime, they say, in the 1800s. The very first turnip parade was about 1863, I think it was. But there is a very old legend attached to the turnip lantern that doesn't get told very often. I remember years ago when I was working for a jewelry trade publication, and we always went over to Switzerland for a very big jewelry fair. And during that fair, that convention, we would produce a daily newspaper as to what was going on. So in order to do that, we had to take shop in a Swiss newspaper office that was near the fairgrounds. And we had a liaison, a wonderful old gentleman named Mr. Felix. And he was a retired newspaperman. And so he was the one who helped we Americans set up our newspaper office in the Swiss newspaper facility. And I remember talking to him a lot about Switzerland because my dad being Swiss, and I just love to hear the stories of olden times. And that is when one year Mr. Felix told me about the real legend behind the turnip lantern. The story goes that there was an old woman who was alone, and she had nobody, no family, no friends. The start of Advent, she wanted to go to church, but she lived way out in the Alps in a little house, a little hut. And the service was at night. And so she didn't know how she would get there safely at night. She didn't have anything to help her light the way. She didn't have a fancy lantern, a metal one, or one made out of wood. She didn't have a beautiful big candle to stick in it to make sure that it would make the journey. But she wanted so badly to go to church. She looked around her barren room that she lived in, an old rickety chair, a table, the fire with a few logs going in it. That was about it. So there she was, feeling sorry for herself as the sun started to go down. And all she said was like, Lord, I just want to be in your house of worship. I just want to be around other people. I need to find my way on the path safely to get to you. And that's when all of a sudden she looked over at the basket that was near the fireplace. And it was about empty. 1 carrot and then 1 turnip. And that's when she had an epiphany. She took the turnip and she cut into it and she hollowed it out and she made little designs in it so that the light could shine through on the path. And then she took whatever little candle she had left and she put it in the turnip. And then she took a string and there she had her lantern to light her path. And for a long time, the story would go that not only would it be a way to light your way to go and worship God, but later on it started to evolve as a way of carving lanterns out of turnips and putting them in the forest, putting them on mountain paths as a way to light the path for Mary at Christmas time to make it to the church, to make it to the stable. I like that story of the lonely old lady who had nothing really, and she so desperately wanted to connect with God's children, with God, that she looked around and she saw that with God she had everything that she needed. I cannot stress enough, my friends, to keep your life simple, to open your eyes and see that with God we have everything that we need. This is a time of year when we might feel as if we don't have enough, or we might be worried about the prices of everything. Are we going to be able to cook what we used to cook because the ingredients are so expensive? Are we going to be able to get gifts for loved ones because everything is so expensive? Are we going to be able to heat our houses, keep the electric going? Everything is so expensive. And as the world keeps saying what the holidays are all about, buy, and make it all festive, and you have to have, a whole table filled with cookies and a whole table filled with all this food. You don't. You don't need any of that. It's nice to have. Yes, it is. And it does feel a little sorrowful when you do have to scale back because of finances. It is not fun. But the reality is, the simple life is the best. The reality is that when we decide that we don't need anything but God, then the abundance appears. And when I say abundance, I don't mean big fancy houses or all the little trinkets and toys you want. When I say the abundance appears, I'm talking turnips, friends. I'm talking a little turnip appears as a solution to the lantern that you need to light your way to get to church. This is the abundance that I'm talking about. That's all around. The little things, the unexpected things that are a gift from God, used to bless you, to help you, to show you a new way, to get you on your path, a lighted path, to guide your steps forward. As the season of Thanksgiving gives way to the season of Christmas, I urge you all to take a moment, take a deep breath, and look for the turnips in your life. Look for those blessings that can indeed light your path. Thank you for joining me here at Old Stonewall Farm, and I will see you shortly.